Hello and welcome to this, the 13th in my series about disciples who showed their devotion to Jesus through sharing or sacrifice or service. And tomorrow will be the last one. But today we're looking at Franz Jägerstätter. Perhaps not very well known in the world, but he was an Austrian farmer, born and brought up in a small village in Austria in the 1930s. Although he had inherited a farm from his stepfather, he was sent to work in the mines. I guess it was a form of national service. I don't know. But he did that. But when he came back, either on his return or while he was in the mines, he found Jesus. He'd always been to church. The whole village really were regular worshippers at the Catholic Church. But he somehow his faith had really come alive, and he believed in Jesus. And when he got back, he got married to a devout Christian, and between them they had 3 children. But then the Second World War came along. Austria was under the control of Germany, and eventually France was called into the army, the German army. He did his basic training, but then he realized that he could not serve under Hitler, and he refused to take the vow of what would you call it? His promise to serve Hitler, his vow of obedience to Hitler. He refused to take that, and so he was arrested. But for a long while, he had conversations. Long while before that, he'd been having conversations with his parish priest and conversations with the regional Catholic bishop, saying, "I can't serve the Nazis." Even the bishop and his priest were trying to persuade him it was his Christian duty to defend his nation. But in the end, when he was actually called up, as I say, he couldn't take the oath of allegiance to Hitler, and he refused to become a combat soldier. He did offer to go into the medical corps and at least be able to serve by tending the wounded, but they refused that, and all sorts of people put pressure on him. Everybody in the village turned against him, and once he was in prison, turned against his wife. She was really chased out of the church because she shared Franz's views on fighting. And time and time again, in his prison, he was beaten up or tortured or psychological torture, but he withstood it. And at his trial, the presiding officer at his court-martial, I guess it was, tried to persuade him. And at the last minute, they said, if you sign this document that says you give up what you've been saying and acknowledge that you were wrong to refuse to fight for your country, then you will live. And he said, no, I can't. It is not right to fight. And he was then executed by beheading in 1943. The Catholic Church eventually beatified him, made him a saint, and that seems a bit hypocritical, really, for a church that had tried to persuade him to fight for Hitler and to fight for his nation. But there comes a point, doesn't there, when to serve God means you reject your nation and you reject the political leadership that your nation has. If the Bible says we are to be what is subject to the law, that doesn't mean to say we have to obey every law. If there's a law that we think is against the will of God, then we are free to disobey it as Christians, as long as we are willing to accept the consequences. And Franz Jägerstätter was willing to accept the consequences of saying, I cannot fight for Hitler, I cannot fight for my nation, I cannot fight. Franz Jägerstätter.